Good afternoon, especially after my long hiatus from putting things up on YouTube. I hope I shall be putting things up more often from now on. Now, one of the stories in the news this week is of a 12-year-old girl, I think in Bilton, who was pulled out of class for wearing a Union Jack dress. Now, the school was holding a Heritage Day and was encouraging people to come in the dress of, well, their heritage. So she turned up in a Union Jack and was going to make a speech about Britishness. But for some reason, a teacher objected and pulled her out of the class, and she was left to sit outside or something, and they said, oh, you can wear a second-hand school uniform. She wasn't the only one who was told that their dress was unacceptable. A Welsh lad was told off because he was wearing the Welsh flag. And a farmer's son had turned up in the traditional costume, apparently, of farmers, which is of a check shirt and flat cap. Now, a lot of people have been talking about this since, and talking about how it reflects an ingrained anti-Britishness amongst a certain part of the establishment. There is something in this, although the waving of Union Jack flags became acceptable in the 90s. And Jerry Halliwell of the Spice Girls famously wore a Union Jack dress on stage. I think it was because Tony Blair was also strongly in favour of multiculturalism, and the Labour Party stressed this. So that it wasn't seen wearing a Union Jack, wearing Union Jacks and talking about Britishness wasn't seen as something offensive. Because there were people at the time trying to make it more inclusive. I mean, there was an advert on television which said you can still get how the character of Britain was basically hadn't changed, but included people of colour, and it said at one point, oh yes, and you can still get a Lancashire hot pot, and it was showing these two black gentlemen wearing bowler hats and suits, basically, and dining, having, well, I assume it's Lancashire's hot pots, and so on. But there is a lot of suspicion and deep hostility to any celebration of traditional Britishness and its symbols, like the Union Jack, by a section of the anti-racist left. Now, I was at school at the time the 1980 to 1981 race riots broke out. They weren't race riots, they were actually more like insurrections against the police, but they launched a huge national debate about racism, and people were coming into schools to teach children how to be anti-racist, and so on. And this had an effect in what you could wear and what you could paint in art. One of my friends at the time was a mod. He wasn't racist at all, but as a mod, he liked the symbols of British patriotism, the Union Jack and the British Bulldog. And we're not lesson, we were told we could paint what we liked. And so he drew the Union flag and a bulldog. And the teacher came around and had a quiet word with him to say that, please don't, because people might think you're a racist. Now, it's not hard to understand why this might be so, considering the way, the iconography of Britishness was appropriated by by the real fascist right, like the BNP, the National Front, going further back, Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British Union of Fascists. I mean, they all used to wave the national, our national flag around at the rallies. So, you can understand why some people of colour, not all, might consider this to be, offensive. And of course, there is also an attitude now that white culture is inherently racist. This comes from critical race theory. Not because of anything, any attitude towards people of colour or any of its content, but simply because that white people having their own culture is seen as somehow racist against black people, Asians and other people of colour. Presumably because they feel excluded from it and can't contribute. Unfortunately, what this means is that there is this hypocrisy going on, this set of double standards, where ethnic minority communities are allowed to be proud of their culture, but traditional white British can't be proud of Britain. I say white British, it could also be people of colour, because I don't know what the statistics are now, but of the Windrush generation, they asked the Caribbean immigrants about their attitudes towards Britain, and 84% of them said they were proud to be British. And a lot of ethnic minorities, members of ethnic minorities, do feel proud to be British, because many of them coming here from terrible, repressive cultures run by truly evil dictators, and they are freer and safer here than they are in their home countries. There is also the point that such heritage days may be seen as divisive. Back in the 1980s, a number of cultural critics attacked the heritage industry, which was just then arising, under Margaret Thatcher, and their objections to the heritage industry was that it was against the deindustrialisation at the time, when factories and mines were closing. People were being thrown out of work, but then these factories and mines reopened as heritage centres and museums, and so were taking the place of genuine working industries. That was one objection. The other objection was that you were turning the past into a theme park, and some of those theme parks would, fantasy presented a very cartoony image of the park of the past simply for fun. And another objection was that it was presenting a very conservative view of the past. Merry England, everything great and wonderful, and that history had effectively come to an end. There was no need for further change or innovation, and this was shown in the attitude of various right-wing American think tanks and organisations. Interestingly, one of these critics also objected to it on the grounds that heritage days, like the one I think it's Bilton School, put on, are divisive. And their example was of a school in America which was put on a Heritage Day, where everybody was encouraged to wear the national costume and bring in a food or something from their national cuisine. And there was a problem because one of the students was, like many Americans, he was ethnically mixed. I think he was white, but he was a mixture of different European nationalities. And so he was left, what do I go in as? What do I go in as? And they solved this problem by saying, you're American, kid. And his national dish was a hamburger. Okay. Many people in America are a mixture of nationalities and sometimes different races. So this can present a problem. I think things have changed a little bit in that history is no longer being dominated by conservatives and the conservative view, but if anything has gone the other way, so that British history is being condemned as being racist and imperialist and colonialist, and you have this calls to decolonize whiteness. Any kind of presentation of the empire as a good thing or just simply not entirely a bad thing, the positive aspects as well as the negatives, is seen as being horrendously racist, unacceptably racist. There have been instances where I think of the last night of the Plums, where they sing Rule Britannia. That was attacked. That has been attacked because of the line, Britons never, never shall be slaves. And that's seen as being hypocritical because at the time this was written, Britain was engaging, like just about every other country and culture on earth, in the slave trade. And so there were people demanding that this be dropped, and so on. Now, what the girl wanted to say in her speech was about the Queen, fish and chips, and tea, which are all major, essential elements of of traditional Britishness. But also, she was also going to say that modern British culture is diverse, and she said that there are people of colour from outside Britain are contributing. Absolutely. So, I think that the girl was actually what she was wearing, the Union Jack dress, and when she was talking about Britishness, she wanted to talk about Britishness, should be quite acceptable, especially because it's the majority culture of this country. And it is being influenced by the cultures of some of the people who have migrated here. And so in that sense, I think that the people who censured the girl and the Welsh lad and the farmer were wrong in what they did. Because if you're about celebrating people's, the culture and the nationality of everybody in Britain, you have to include British culture as well. And you should recognise that British culture is not synonymous with racism, no matter how offensive some people may find it and think it is. Thank you.